Good evening. Alan here with Discovering Buddhism. And it's our second week on this topic of the spiritual teacher. Good to be here. Good to be with you. Hope you're receiving loud and clear. So sorry about last week when everything just froze up. So it's something to do with the internet traffic. And hi, Julia. Good. Thanks for saying hello. Yes, it's just something that we can't help. And by starting at 6, we're hoping that we'll avoid what seems to be the peak hour, which is around about 7:45, 8 o'clock from then on. And so if by starting at 6, we'll and truly finish by hopefully 7:30 or even before. Things will be better. So, but of course, if it happens again, can't help it. I'm sorry. It's very frustrating all around. But I must say that materials you've got are pretty good, particularly the transcript by Venerable Connie Miller on the topic of her teachings. The more I've been reading it, the more impressed I am how well she covers the topic. And so basically, even if we didn't have these live teachings, her teachings are excellent. They do cover the field really well. And I'll be referring to them tonight. So also tonight, or yesterday, I sent you, apart from the topic summary, tonight's topic summary, I sent you some extracts by Alex Berzin on the topic. He's a very senior Western teacher, probably one of the first Westerners to go to India in the 60s probably, or early 70s, met the Dalai Lama soon after he came out of Tibet, learnt Tibetan. He was there on a scholarship to study Tibetan and Tibetan Buddhism. He wasn't on the hippie. He wasn't one of the hippies. He's there for academic reasons, and then he became ordained, and then I think he became well, he's not ordained now, but he's still regarded as a very good translator and a very good teacher as well. And he's written this book on the spiritual teacher. And so those extracts I sent you, one of them is a chapter from his book on the spiritual teacher. And then there are a few articles he's written about, hi Ben. He's written a few articles about Westerners, how Westerners approach the idea of a spiritual teacher and some of the problems that come up. So it's quite, his way of writing is quite wordy, I find. He does, but it's interesting. A lot of it involves his own experience of how he found his own spiritual teachers, and whose relationship. They're all the very high lamas that were in India at the time, soon after they left Tibet. So he had probably the very best teachers, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So there we go. So we'll come to that, and we also, I'll try and sort of cover fairly quickly what we missed out on last week. A couple of the topics there that we didn't cover because we got interrupted halfway through last week. But let's just do 5 minutes of breathing meditation, mindfulness meditation, to calm ourselves and to become more receptive to teachings and so on. Okay, so let's get comfortable physically. All right, so we now just come into our body and mind, getting comfortable on either the chair, the floor, whatever position is relaxing. Get evenly balanced on the surface we're resting on. eyes are either closed or just letting in some light, gazing ahead. Just scanning the body for any tension, any holding on. Shoulders and the neck and the head relaxed. The face muscles, the eye muscles soft. Feel we're physically letting go. With each out breath, we're releasing, relaxing, letting go. And then coming into the breath. Watching how the body moves with the breath. Just observing, stepping aside, nothing to do, watching what's already happening, how the breath enters and leaves the body, one breath at a time. Being alert for the wandering mind, noticing when we've lost our object, lost the breath, noting that distraction, that thought, and releasing, letting go of the distraction, and coming back to the breath. Coming back to the breath each time we're distracted without losing patience. Home to the breath. Just relax. So as always, if you have anything that you'd like to raise, any questions, any comments, feel to just tap something out there on the live chat as we go along. As I said last week, this is a difficult topic. It's not elementary, and raises quite a few issues, and takes quite a bit of. It's hard to teach too in some ways. So, as I mentioned last week, this is something that is very elementary for monastics. Traditionally in Tibet, the topic of guru devotion was, I think, the very first topic taught, because it was just a reminder to the monks of what they already knew. They already were living in the monastery. They were already seeing teachers and having contact with the teachers. They might have had their own teachers, depending on how old they were. Very different to the Westerners who, when they come to Tibetan Buddhism, they haven't, the notion of teacher is not the same as what they're used to in their normal schooling, what we've experienced in our secular education, the role of the teacher, very different to the role of the teacher in the Tibetan traditions when we're learning spiritual path. So just the bottom of page, last week's notes, where His Holiness pointed out that in the monasteries, traditionally, the person became a good teacher by reputation. So because the teachers and the monks were all living together, they could actually see the teachers in action. They could talk to each other about whether they were a good teacher or they're a bad teacher. So the person gained respect, the teacher gained respect from his actual teachings and experience that how he affected his students, and how just by his activities as a teacher and his conduct, which could all be observed very closely, teachers collected a reputation. Of course, because not being monastics, Westerners come from a completely different background. So, just looking at my pages here. So I think that's as far as we got last week. We didn't actually talk much about the importance of relying on spiritual teachers, the different levels and so on. So just to actually quickly, the points are fairly basic. The idea that we need teachers of any kind, even secular. So Connie Miller talks about this very well. As even from birth, our parents taught us basic things about how to eat, how to dress, how to behave in the world. So these very basic things came from our parents, and then later our teachers taught us the alphabet, how to read, which is the beginning, sort of the entrance to knowledge. Traditionally, the person who teaches the alphabet, both in Tibet and even in the West, Tibetan teachers say that person is really a very important person. It's actually one of our teachers, not necessarily our guru, but a very important person, because by teaching us the alphabet, it opened up this whole world of knowledge and access to the Dharma, access to the teachings that beginning of our path to liberation. So there's those sort of teachers. Then there are people. So some of those teachers in our schooling may have had a influence. There might have been a particular teacher who actually inspired us and encouraged us. So it could have been the teacher who, remember when I was doing a compulsory class in woodwork, which I didn't like, because we just had to do this at high school as part of our training. I don't know. I think the girls did home science and the boys had to do woodwork. And I wasn't at all interested. But this particular woodwork teacher was very, very kind. And he, we were all making our wooden bookends and things. And I don't think I was very good, but he actually told me that he thought I was really very quite skillful at my woodwork. And he said I'd make a really good doctor. I was only probably about 10 years old. And I was just quite, it really inspired me actually, and gave me great confidence in what I could do. To have somebody like that say something. So there could be these people who've just inspired us. I didn't become a doctor, but it's just good to know that someone could actually see that. So even people who are outside our family can sometimes be even more influential when they're not sort of biased. You know? So this says, even if we need teachers teach us how to drive, how to ride a bike, how to play the piano, these things that more mundane, how much more must we need a teacher to actually teach us how to improve our minds, how to and not only improve our minds, but actually improve our minds to such an extent that we become liberated from all our suffering, all our problems, all our negativities, all our emotional problems, and become to develop our minds to become Buddha minds. This is the great offering of the Dharma, the Tibetan Buddhas or Buddhist teachings. So, so these teachers are important in secular way, and also they must be even more important to teach us any kind of spiritual path. And because it's a spiritual path, they need to be very well qualified. And so we need to be careful to choose teachers who are able to do the job. So the emphasis is to choose carefully and to be skeptical. As His Holiness says in his teachings, and Connie Miller in her teachings says that there's no urgency. So we shouldn't approach it as something that has to be rushed. And as Lama Zopa mentions in his extracts from the readings, there's a lot of it's to do with our merit, our predispositions, what we've done before, possibly in previous lives. So the fact that we're even interested in spiritual development or doing something with the mind means that we must have had some connection in the past. There must be some cord which didn't happen in our education because we weren't brought up with contact with Buddhist teachings or Dharma. So there must have been some sort of seed planted in previous life, and that seed was almost certainly planted by a teacher. And so there is some karmic seeds or just predispositions in our mind to meet a teacher. So these we have had teachings in the past, and so this is why quite often when we meet a teacher, from some of the stories people's personal accounts of how they met their teachers, there's some sort of recognition that this person is my teacher. There's some sort of familiarity. As one of the points in Connie Miller's transcript, she says, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So you often hear this in teachings about finding the guru or finding a teacher. The student is ready, the teacher will appear. So it's really basically saying that there is the mind needs to be ready. There is some karmic sort of force involved in meeting the teacher. At the right time, it will happen. It doesn't mean we're not sort of doing practices to be ready for the teacher and realise how important the teacher is. But there is a sort of conjunction of events, the causes from this life and also past lives and so on. So just looking at the notes from last week, His Holiness, just quoting on page 2, His Holiness says, qualified spiritual mentors guide us along the path by giving teaching, give us Dharma advice, precepts, oral transmissions and empowerments. And when we experience blocks in our practice, they teach us the antidotes to overcome them. And if we need a teacher to learn to drive, we need one for more complex aim of transforming the mind to that of a Buddha. So, so these are just very useful points. Also from last week, the difference between spiritual and secular teaching points. Also from last week, the difference between spiritual and secular teachers. I think I got most of these points from His Holiness' teaching, probably also from Connie Miller's teaching. So basically our background is with academic teachers, people from school, high school, maybe university, where the teacher is there to impart knowledge. And we learn, we go for whoever the university, for example, will provide a teacher, and we assume that that person has done previous study. They could be a professor or have academic qualifications, doctorate and so on. So it's not really a personal thing. We just want the person to be qualified, to know the subject matter and to be able to impart the material, part of the knowledge. That's what we're there for. We're not there for some sort of personal connection. This is very different to the Dharma teacher, the spiritual teacher, where we're looking for some sort of connection, some sort of maybe inspiration from the teacher. Another difference is that the spiritual teacher is not in this sort of business set. It's like a business setting where the teacher is obviously paid by the university. We might pay fees and we get what we pay for. So very different to the idea of a spiritual teacher who's not basically there to be paid, although we can make offerings. The spiritual teacher, I guess one thing in common is that neither the secular teacher or the spiritual teacher is there to give us advice about our personal life or mundane things. This comes out quite clear that he was a very close disciple, student of Serkon Rinpoche, one of the very high Tibetan teachers who's since passed away, one of the Dalai Lama's guru. They never talked ever about any personal things, mundane things. They only talked about Dharma matters. So never did Alex Burson talk about his personal life, personal relationship, or anything that wasn't to do with Dharma. So His Holiness says actually that it's a mistake to actually expect the Dharma teacher to be able to guide us in these sort of things, relationships and family matters and so on. to have that expectation is to misjudge what the relationship offers. And this can be because the Westerners are not really familiar. They're probably familiar with how Dharma teachers, what their role is, because they haven't actually had a person in their life before like that. And they might expect the Dharma teacher is teaching compassion, wisdom, to be able to teach them about their personal problems. When reading Lama Yeshe's biography, Big Love, he says he points out how it does. The students coming to him with their personal problems about particularly their relationship. He says that's what made him very tired. And even though he actually tried to help them with these things, has no knowledge of these sort of things, and the students really should be able to work these things out themselves. So the teacher's role is not to fulfill emotional needs, emotional shortcomings of the student. And so on this, you can see Alex Burson made a few points in tonight's notes about how he points out the difference between a therapist in the West and a Dharma instructor. That means a spiritual teacher. So quite interesting. Don't spend too long on it, but basically he's just pointing out that the role of a therapist is really basically to listen, not necessarily to offer any ethical guidelines, only to listen, very different to the spiritual teacher who's there to offer a way of living and a way of thinking, very different to what a therapist in the West does. So ethical guidelines are very rarely, if ever, used by the therapist, whether they basically are the basis of spiritual practice, how we act, how we speak, how we think, very much part of our spiritual path, and part of our spiritual path in Buddhism. Also, he points out the interesting point that most neurotic behaviour, he calls it, whereas normally the spiritual seeker won't have these particular problems. I laughed a bit at that because sometimes that's the reason we go to the Dharma, is because we have so personal problems. We're not happy for some reason in our way of life. So we might have some neurotic behaviour, but that's sort of like the catalyst to go to looking for a spiritual path. Not everybody will do that. Probably most people, particularly in America, will just go to their therapist if they've got a personal problem and go into therapy for years and years and years, paying enormous amounts of money. Lama Zopa often makes fun of how expensive therapy is, psychotherapy is, and psychiatrists are, and always saying, well, you can be your own therapist, and then you'll give some basic teachings on compassion and thinking of others rather than self, and how this can save you millions of dollars in therapy costs. But of course, sometimes the therapy will have a useful function. I do remember His Holiness being asked about people with mental illness and Buddhism, and he did say that basically, if Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, and any Buddhist teachings are not there, they're taught to people who don't have mental illnesses. They're intended to be used by people who are basically they have mental defects, emotional problems, but according by the standards of their society, they don't have a mental illness. So if people do have he said, I don't know anything about mental illnesses. I suggest that people who have it go get therapy, perhaps might need medication, get expert help. There are doctors who can do that, and then if they can overcome their immediate mental illness, then they can start studying spiritual practices, looking into the teachings, the Dharma. So basically, the spiritual teacher is not the therapist, not the guidance counselor, and so on. So basically last week, I've got some points there. His Holiness says how important it is to actually check out the spiritual teacher, be skeptical. Few quotes. He said we should not chase spiritual mentors like dogs gobbling meat. Obviously, a very graphic image, like the groupie or person who's just there to actually grasp that someone who appears to be a teacher, maybe bedazzled by the high title, the robes, or whatever. So he repeatedly says this is not the way to look for a spiritual teacher. Look for the learnedness and the reputation of the teacher rather than titles and thrones, and beware of charisma. Some people are misled by the charisma or the personality of the teacher rather than the actual content and what they actually are living, what their realizations are, what their mind is. So yes, he says, he actually says probably it's a good start if you just, there's a teacher that somebody says is worth listening to and is wonderful, to just go along and approach that teacher as a professor, as an expert who on something, and see whether they can they have any more impact than just imparting knowledge. But he said it's might be a good approach to start with a teacher by just seeing them, books that they've written, discover whether they're actually what sort of life they lead, whether they actually live what they teach. Then gradually you could actually, if you satisfied, to spend more time in their presence and gradually develop some sort of devotion to that person, but very slowly, very slowly. And also the last point from last week is something about the different levels of spiritual teacher. Those who teach the individual liberation vehicle. This is the Theravadan vehicle, the way to liberation, as against the Mahayana vehicle, using the Bodhisattva path, and then there's the Tantric vehicle. So even though our teacher might be able to teach all of those, His Holiness points out that actually the qualifications slightly are different. So the fundamental vehicle, that means if we're looking for a teacher to teach us the way out of suffering and liberation, then that person, we need to see that person after we check, of course, and make sure that person has a qualification. We see them as a representative of the Buddha. That's for the individual liberation vehicle. Then with the Mahayana vehicle, if we're looking for the Bodhisattva path, which is of course the Tibetan Buddhist path, the way we see, after checking thoroughly, we need to see that teacher as equal or like a Buddha for the Mahayana path, the Sutra path. And then if we are on the Tantric path, which is Vajra, the Vajrapāla tantric vehicle, we need to see that person as the guru, as a Buddha. And he said this is what can be quite confusing. And so he said taught to beginners because it's open to misinterpretation, confusion. So so probably we'll leave that thing to next week, seeing the Buddha, the teacher as a Buddha. We'll leave that to next week, I think. We look at different bits. So just coming back now to tonight, the different levels of spiritual teachers. So both Alex Burson covers this, and also Connie Miller. Connie Miller is very, very good on this. In her second week's teaching, she distinguishes different levels of teachers, people who are teaching Buddhism in some form, teachers teaching, or objectively. So when we're looking at different levels of teacher, there can be the objective viewpoint, and there's also the learner's viewpoint, the student's viewpoint, how they're seeing that teacher. So so just looking now at these different, she actually says there are 4, and Alex Burson or Buddhism. So the first one is the teacher who is teaching the university professor or the academic professor. So it doesn't mean that they're actually teaching at university, but she says it's a bit like when you go to university, you listen to the teacher for information. The aim is not to impart personal knowledge or personal experience, but actual objective knowledge. So so this could be it could be actually a university person in the university context, or it could be somebody very learned teaching at a centre who actually has they could have degrees, doctorates in Buddhism, but they could also have great experience they could have even been ordained. They could have extraordinary academic experience in the study of Buddhism. So this is probably, as His Holiness said, if we're new to hearing Buddhist teachings, approaching as a student the teacher as a learned professor could be a good start. And some students may only want that. They may only want information and not want any sort of transforming experience. So these teachers could be teachers that could be their objective to give knowledge, or it could be what the students want. So that's the professor of Buddhism. So then the next one are Dharma instructors, and she says she includes herself in that. Of course, she's a very high teacher, Connie Miller. So so these are could be Western teachers. They may have faith in the teachings and knowledge of the teaching, but they're still at the beginning stage as far as embodying the teachings and having realized mind transformation. So so those teachers, probably people who are teaching discovering Buddhism, particularly Westerners, I have virtually no knowledge compared to people, great teachers. Even Connie Miller would know far more than me. I'm learning as I go along, teaching them. So definitely, I would say I have never had any great realization. So Dharma instructor is not a guru. Just to quote what she says, they may have partial realization or flashes of understanding. They may be making some progress. Perhaps they've been doing it a bit longer than the student, but you wouldn't call a Dharma instructor a guru, she says. So these, both Dharma instructors and Buddhist professors, impart knowledge and understanding through verbal instruction, just by giving teachings. So there's the second one. The third one, meditation and ritual trainers. Now, these seem very similar to Dharma instruction, but they're special symbolism. It could be very learned on the symbolism of iconography, on what tankas symbolize, so that they also might be very good at leading meditation, setting up altars, teaching you how to meditate. So again, these train you in how to meditate and setting up altars, setting up rituals. So again, they're imparting knowledge, a particular type of knowledge. So then the fourth one, she says, this is where we transform from imparting knowledge to something much deeper, the spiritual mentor. So this is where she says this step, going from Dharma teachers, Dharma professors, meditation teachers, and so on, to the spiritual mentor, spiritual teacher, is the big one. And that's where we need to be careful and take be careful, take things slowly. So and she actually says once we get to this level, there's 4 subcategories. So even at this level, there are different layers. Than just acquiring knowledge.